If I could kindly ask my panel members to come on stage, one by one as I introduce them. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, of course. Give them a round of applause. We need a bit of energy here. Firstly, Professor Mthuli Ncube, who's a professor of public policy at Oxford University. He's Cambridge trained. Specializes in mathematical finance, but has got a wealth of experience, including in academia, in banking, various state institutions, including here in South Africa and in the region as well. Can't think of anyone better to be part of this panel. And then our second panel member is well-known South African JP Landman. You know you're so famous that you're known as JP, whatever it stands for. And of course, JP, you know, whenever I introduce JP, I'm sure he's probably going to get embarrassed if I keep doing it. I get warm and fuzzy feelings. He's one of those South Africans who are deeply committed to the country, one of our top-notch scenario planners, and I think an eternal optimist without shying away from hard conversation. Can we please welcome all of them onto the stage? JP, I'm going to start with you and just ask what your answer to the question is whether globalization is crumbling, or is that a melodramatic framing?
I think it's melodramatic. I really like Jeffrey's summary. It's not crumbling, but it is grumbling. I think that was very apt. And we've got to pay attention to the grumbling. It's no good ignoring it. It's no good pretending it's not there. We've got to deal with it politically and socially. But crumbling, no, I think that's a bit too much.
Would you agree with him?
Yes, I indeed agree. Certainly grumbling, there's some signs of deglobalization, but I don't think it will halt. I think it will be countered, and it should be countered in my view. What are the signs? Is Brexit, is the rise of candidates such as Donald Trump, is even South Africa trying to pull out of the ICC. That's also anti-globalization. You see it everywhere, anti-immigration, policies out of Europe, in Germany, and elsewhere, in Switzerland, where I spend more time. So there are signs of that, but I think that it will be countered. It should be countered. Let's see what happens in the US, whether, who wins. I think Jeff was right that it matters who wins. We might have a different story tomorrow. But also, what has disturbed me the most is a fallout of the financial crisis is really US banks, European banks, global banks pulling out of Africa and starving Africa of capital in the form of credit lines and hurting trade finance. Africa needs about $100 billion a year in terms of trade finance, and it is under threat from excessive regulation as a fallout of the financial crisis. So that's a part of this deglobalization which is bothering me, and I think it should be reversed.
Okay, I want us to have a dynamic discussion about a couple of themes that come out of the keynote. And please feel free to not wait for all my prompt questions and fight amongst yourself as well while I go have a cup of tea there in the background. The first issue I want to drill down into, JP, is, that final slide. And everyone was clapping. And I thought, really? Okay, maybe I'm the only pessimistic South African here. When Professor Sachs tells us that public investment is important. It's the education, stupid, and good governance. I think to myself, okay, I mean, this guy's a good international economist, but those things are not rocket sciences. The proof is in the pudding. But when I look at the facts in South Africa, I think to myself, the state of the state is in a woefully bad state. We don't get returns on investment for education, even though we've got good per capita spend compared to other nations. And when it comes to public investment, particularly in social welfare, we don't have a cash problem, but we do seem to have a technocratic problem, a leadership problem, an ethics problem. So why are South Africans applauding?
Well, I think the way I understood it, the reason I applauded, I thought it's very good that we draw the attention to education. Because as you say, Eusebius, we're spending a lot of money on education by any global standard. But we all know the problem is quality. And to be quite frank, we'll also know what the problem with quality is. The elephant in the room that we don't talk about is the Democratic Teachers Union. And the grip that they've got on the appointment of principals, on the appointment of teachers, and the fact that they are completely and wholly against any form of evaluation. Now, I don't think you can build a proper education system without rigorous evaluation. That is the elephant in the room that we've got to address. And if you can sort that out, I think the rest will follow.
Prof. Sachs, can I bring you in here? I was very fascinated by that chart that correlated quality education, not just spending on education, with economic growth, and that cool little acronym PISA, I think it was, that you pulled out of your hat. Can we say a little bit more about that? Because obviously, in a country where a lot of the debate around education has to do with access, we don't have a lot of public discourse around quality. What are some of the things that are in there? Because I'd love to know from a curricular point of view, a teaching point of view, where our conversation should be going while we're still having a conversation about access.
Absolutely. We should focus on quality as we should focus on access. I was looking at some of the figures which Jeff Sachs, I think, worked very hard in terms of the MDGs, looking at, for instance, entry into primary school in terms of universal education. And what we forgot to do as well is to look at, dropout rates. We have very high dropout rates in Africa. In South Africa universities. I used to be dean at WITS, so I know about dropout rates, and I try to do my bit about that. So that's one issue, and then the issue of quality, then the issue of the type of education, whether is it just pure academic, straight to academic university, or some vocational as well. Where do we draw the line? Should we have a dichotomous education a la Swiss style and German style? So those things are important. And then something that is also important is what you do with your educated people as a country, as a government. If you push them out, like what Zimbabwe did, Zimbabwe is highly educated people, we didn't look far, and then you push them out. So you lose them. And you can see where Zimbabwe was sitting on the chart. It was somewhere in the middle, but low growth. And what's missing is issues around governance, around how you manage those resources. So I agree, it is quality, it is the type of education, the entry rates, the dropout rates, but equally how you manage those resources.
Prof. Sachs, please jump in here. Prof. Ngube stole your cue.
It's a question I'd also like to get a better understanding from here. When I look at the Korean case, which was way up in the corner, somehow they've been able to, first, every parent just wants their child to get an education. That's been a social compulsion, I would say, for half a century. Then they really work on getting trained teachers. And I know that's a big problem here, but I know it in much of Africa, where I work in a lot of parts of West Africa, for example, the teachers are absolutely without the skills at any level. Then there's a big question, I don't know how important it is in the South African context, but in a lot of places also where I'm working in West Africa, for example, the local language issues are huge issues that haven't been sorted out because the kids come at the lower level and they're trying to teach them in a language they don't even understand. So I think that this is absolutely central, and one question I would also ask is, to what extent can we use new technologies? To what extent can we use online? To what extent can we use connected classrooms? To what extent can we use new kinds of feedback or e-tutoring so that you're pairing kids with someone that can help them in creative ways? If the government said, this is our priority, we know that this is really the future and we can't get this wrong, to what extent are there new things that could be added to the mix, since you've been at this?
If I can jump in for 30 seconds, Jeff is right, but there's something else going on. When we looked at the data in Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, those countries, and we computed what we call a service delivery index or something, looking at education and health, there's also a problem of just teacher absenteeism. Teachers not showing up, or showing up for half the time or a third of the time, and half the time they're selling tomatoes, looking for them. Why? It's about salaries. You've got a delay of something like 2 months, they haven't been paid. And the inspector system has collapsed. The old inspectors in the 60s would just show up to see if the headmaster is there and the teachers are there. That system is gone. The participation by parents in the schools is missing. So we need all of that kind of, I don't know what to call it, it's some kind of institutional arrangements within the education sector, in addition to the teacher training that Jeff has mentioned, to avoid this teacher absenteeism problem.
Okay, I wanted to move on, but just JP, I want you to jump in here. I mean, it seems if you are solution-oriented, you may be excited by the education value chain that's got so many problems that need to be solved. But of course, if you're also prone to getting depressed when the problem is big, you might also think, oh gosh, where do I start? Because from early childhood development right up to tertiary, it seems like there are critical issues, like Prof. Ngube is saying, all along the way, where there are opportunities for quick fixes. But if you had to write down a to-do list in terms of the South African education system, I mean, everything from mud structures in the Eastern Cape, this government within a couple of weeks will miss its own legally binding deadlines from an infrastructure point of view to make all schools look like proper schools. We haven't even begun to talk about what it means to decolonize a science curriculum or English curriculum. Are you optimistic, stepping back from that detail, that we can yet get better returns, as Jeff recommends, in terms of public investment into this public good?
Yes, I think we can. At the National Planning Commission, yes, it actually does exist. At the National Planning Commission, let me tell you what the problem is. The National Development Plan, which many people think is not being implemented, is measured by the government over a range of, just hold your chairs, 1,739 indicators. Now, you laugh because your intuition tells you this just cannot work. And what we're doing at the moment in the National Planning Commission is we're trying to reduce that to 60, 70 numbers, 60, 70 indicators at best. Now, coming to education, talking to a range of people all over the country, it seems to us that you can really move the dial if you do three things. Focus on the principles. We're in the fortunate position that about half the principals are going to retire in the next 10 years. So there's a fantastic opportunity to bring in new talent and new expertise. To do that, you've got to confront SATU. That's the second thing you've got to do. And thirdly, bring in the inspectors. Bring the inspectors back. Evaluation. And all the evidence that we've collected so far indicate that if you can do those three things, we can change education. And I think it'll help us a lot in South Africa if we can move away from doing 1,739 things. I mean, I read a cabinet report on these 1,739 indicators. It's actually quite funny. The dashboard is more or less as green as the old mutual color here. Why? Because if you measure 1,739 things, you've got no idea what's going on. If you can just reduce it to 50, the color green will change to, red. And I'm not trying to boost UPSA, but just it will go to red or something. And that's the thing that I think we need to try and do in the nation. We have so many things that we want to do that we miss it. One of the things that I really enjoyed about Jeffrey's speech tonight is his emphasis on investment. Because as part of this project of reducing the 1,739 indicators, some of us are taking the view in the economy, there are only two things that we must do. Investment and skills and training, human capital development. If we do those two things, we can do all the rest. I can't begin to tell you the resistance that we have. No, you must also look at, and then 3,425 other things. Well, it can't work like that. So I think what you did tonight to take out, the 16 development goals, but inside that, you focused on education and investment. I think if we in South Africa can copy that kind of thing into our own national plan and our own way of looking at the country, we can really use CBS move the dial. No question about it.
Let's consider a second theme. Good governance on the final slide, Jeffrey, is music to my ears as a political animal. But we sometimes, especially in this country, we sort of bandy around certain words and phrases, and they become part of our lexicon. Can we unpack that? When we say good governance is a driver of economic growth and hopefully more democratic sharing of the spoils in the international system, what exactly do you mean by good governance, practically?
First, to have competent people in the right positions. government should not be a game where everybody has the wrong job. And this really is a serious matter, not just here. And in my country, it's also the same. You know, we have a Congress, 535 members. I think it's 2 that have a science PhD out of the 535. It's completely pathetic, and a lot of them are quite foolish people. And that's okay. You know, one thing that they could do, even foolish people, is they could kind of observe and oversee, but they shouldn't write the laws the way they do. And my feeling is that countries have lots of skilled, trained people, and part of our emphasis should be on going to the skilled people to try to get good science and engineering and rigorous-based ideas. In the United States, we have, as I said, 500, I don't know if it's 500, but it's close to that, pretty poorly educated congresspeople. And then we have 4,000 universities with some of the best minds in the world. No one asks them their opinion. It's a complete mistake about government to think that it's the elected officials that are the ones that are supposed to do everything. Your country, you have lots of skilled people all over the place. There should be commissions, there should be drafting, there should be going out to the talented people in the country on any issue to try to write a framework. Then, of course, democracy is to make sure that it's, not a trick to get all of the benefits to some narrow class. That's obvious. But you think about it, who do you want actually proposing this? And my recommendation to Hillary Clinton's team over the last few weeks is don't write legislation in the middle of the night with the lobbyists all around in these congressional back rooms, which is literally how the legislation is written. It's corrupt practice by ignorant people. And yet we have the world's, I don't want to say the world's best, but world-class people who could actually do these things that are totally disempowered. So we have to think more creatively about politics. And politics should say, how can South Africa get its best people to be putting in contributions, not only complaining or writing an op-ed, but working on commissions, drafting ideas, helping to draft proposals, with the idea that these are your university professors, these are your experts, these are leaders of business, leaders of civil society, and say to the politicians, look, it's fine, you vote on it in the end, but don't think you know because you don't know. Go to people who do know, and let's get something sensible out of this. That's my idea of what good governance is.
I can tell you. I mean, the central point is well taken, Professor Sachs, but I can tell you for free, South Africans, we love commissions a little bit too much. Problem is we set them up to fail, which is why, Prof. Ngube, I want to move the conversation to a more technical one. You from the School of Governance there at Oxford. One of the anecdotes I love recycling from Oxbridge, from when I spent some time there myself, is that a lot of my British friends who were doing undergraduate degrees, places like Cambridge or Oxford, for the most part, at least 10 years ago when I was there, wanted to have one of two careers. They were either looking to quickly get into investment banking or into, McKinsey, or alternatively, they were very happy to be bureaucrats. How do we build skilled bureaucracy in a country like South Africa where the technocracy is in as weak a state as the quality of political leadership at the top of the bureaucracy?
Well, one way is to build more schools that teach, governance, schools of government. There's one at Wits. UCT has just followed. We need one at the Free State, my friend here. Don't just send, them to Jeffrey Sachs in Columbia. Just build more here, another one in Pretoria. I think that's actually right. I've been amazed at the quality of the bureaucrats that we churn out at Oxford, at my school, but even the undergraduates. Look at those who go into the Conservative Party in the UK. They're just undergraduates. Cameron, eventually became a prime minister. He didn't do a higher degree. So I think investing in the skills of public servants is important, absolutely. And then when they get there, try to keep them and pay them well too. I think that's important. Jeffrey Sachs cited the case of Singapore. They do pay their civil servants. Yeah? Absolutely. They compete with the private sector at doing that. So that we just have to invest in those skills, I'm afraid. But also, we should realize that the skills are also fungible. People should be able to meander out of the corporate sector into government and back. There are certain areas, I can imagine someone in management consulting. If a management consultant, let's say for the health sector, for instance, you could find yourself being a decent bureaucrat in that kind of ministry in government. So, but let's invest in those skills of government.
JP, do you share that sentiment?
Yes, I do. Again, referring to the work that we're doing in the Planning Commission, if we want to build a more capable state, there are again only 2 or 3 things that we have to do. Did you know, I certainly did not, that the average tenure of a Director General in the South African Civil Service is 2.3 years. Now, how can you learn to run a complicated organization? Because most government departments are complicated. The police service employs 200,000 people. There's no bank in the country. There's no insurance company as big as that. We've got 360,000 teachers. How do you manage that? These are complicated organizations. Now, if you've got a Director General or head of department who serves for 2.3 years, well, you're not going to go anywhere. So you've got to stabilize that. How do you stabilize it? You've got to make only one change. After 1994, we gave the responsibility to appoint Director Generals to ministers. The feeling was, quite correctly at the time, that you need to replace the old bureaucracy with a new bureaucracy, make the changes and so on. I don't think anybody objects to that. But that was 21 years ago. You've now done that. There's hardly a whitey left. So that can clearly no longer be your problem. That clearly can no longer be a priority. All you have to do now is take that responsibility away from the minister and give it to a more professional body. And there are various examples. In the UK, for example, you've got a senior civil servant, a senior DG that manages that process. In Canada, you've got a cabinet committee. In Singapore, there's a different model. There are various models that you can copy. But what you do essentially is you remove the absolute discretion of the political head, and in that way try to make your civil service, or at least the appointment of your DGs, more professional. It's not undoable. It can be done. We must just have the guts to identify the problem, which I think we've now done, and then convince the politicians that they must come along. Now, that's of course not that easy because, I'm a minister. I want to throw my weight around. I want to show my wife and my mistress how important I am. So to take that away is a big thing. But I have a great belief, Eusebius, I have a great belief that if you can identify the problems more or less correctly, and you tackle them more or less energetically, you will move the dial, absolutely.
But also there is something else. I don't think South Africa and Africa should be shy or hesitant about also importing skills into the public sector. For instance, one thing that we've been thinking about to assist South Africa with, specific from the UK, is to find retired British civil servants to come and infuse some skills into specific areas. I won't tell you how far that program has gone, but we're working on it. And we think that it can be rolled right across Africa, because if you think you have problems here in terms of the quality of civil service, just go further north, you see some of you operate there as all mutual, you're everywhere. There are more challenges in other countries. So building that civil service, in my view, will also require international skills. They're not just required in the private sector, but also in the public sector. Give people 5-year contracts to come and do a job. They will do it well and pay them well. They're retired, so...
Prof. Ngube, I do want to ask...
Of course, Britain brought Mark Carney from Canada to head
Yes.
the Bank of England, and he was my student. So I doubly, I doubly recommend the approach.
Prof. Tluba, before we move on, I just want to ask you one question. I mean, the body language in the room is positive, as all three of you are talking about pay your civil servants more, incentivize people to become, but there's still a perception problem. You know, it's a bit like, everyone's watching cricket at the moment. It's a bit like cricket. If you're a cricketing coach in junior school, the fattest kid is the one that you send to go and be to be behind the wickets. You don't send him to go and field at point, or you're not going to get Jonty Rhodes to be a wicket keeper. And so you're going to permanently get really a small number of excellent wicket keepers coming through in your team. Here's the point of the analogy. There's a perception that if you are smart, if you've got a business science degree from UCD, you're not going to be thinking about working for the city of Joburg. You're not going to be thinking about working for Province. So even though there's some good positive vibes here as you guys are talking, the truth of the matter is most of the people in this room will probably feel like they're underachieving amongst their peer group if they were working in the state. How do we change perceptions about working for the state being less of an achievement than being a rock star in the private sector?
Jeff, you want to go?
Yeah. Look, the other issue, which obviously has to be on the table, is the impunity of the politicians. If the politicians are completely misbehaving, being a civil servant in such an institution is not a very pleasant thing. And this is a big problem here, and it's a big problem in the United States. So I think the other side of good governance, one part is quality and getting good ideas, and the other part is keeping the corruption down to below a boil. And this is hard, but this is actually fundamental. It's not a joke. Obviously, it's not a joke. It's really a serious issue. And, you know, South Africa's going through this right now where there's just a lot of abuse. My model is Sweden, which is if a minister uses the wrong credit card once, they have to resign. Period. But think of it. It's really saying we don't allow the impunity. And it's very hard to do. It's in the United States, there's so much corruption, so I'm not pointing a finger any place. I'm just saying that this is what degrades government quite fundamentally. And it has to be called out and it has to be taken seriously. And if it gets completely out of control, then all the things we're talking about are impossible. And this is a very, very important matter.
Prof. Tluba?
Just a footnote. It's interesting when Kenya introduced the constitution, creating 47 counties a few years ago to deal with an issue of, I think, real issue of social inclusion, decentralizing, making sure that every county has some parliament or whatever. Well, that was a good thing. But you know what happened? A few bankers were now resigning from the city of Nairobi and going to take jobs in the counties in the middle of nowhere. Why? That's because that's where the money is in terms of corruption. So what happened initially, by decentralizing the country, you're actually decentralizing corruption, so you follow the money. So that's what they were doing. But that was the perverse effect. I think the point Judge Jeff is making is that really dealing with corruption, improving the image of government is the first order of business. Then we can begin to attract, quality people, good skills, who can, last for a long time. I've studied, it's important that we must really focus on government, although the broader issue really is institutions, about good quality institutions, of which government is the apex institution. I've studied 700 elections in Africa, all of them since 1960. Parliamentary, presidential, we know who won, who lost, who cheated, who murdered people during the process and all of that. And it's amazing how that process of creating the apex institution of government is so key. And as all mutual, if a business operating in Africa, you should always watch the points of inflection. Around elections, that's where things always go horribly wrong, when government is not able to replace itself in a sustainable, transparent, and effective way. But government, as the apex of all institutions, is key. And Jeff is right that corruption is something we should root out to create the right image.
JP, I want to explore a final theme before we make the circle bigger and get the audience to engage you as well. And that is specifically to bring it now back to business. You said something wonderful earlier, and I'm glad we captured it on video when you and I chatted before the event. There tends to be, and we deliberately did it now ourselves, knowing we'll get to this point now, but there tends to be a very state-centric approach towards dealing with the effects of globalization in crisis. We construct and deconstruct the state, we reimagine it, how may it benefit us better? What is your message to the business folks in this room? Are they using their agency, their power enough to help problem solve some of the flip side of the opportunities that come with globalization? Jeff mentioned, for example, that despite that wonderful chart that showed us that extreme poverty is declining, there are certain social ills like inequality, Gini coefficients, that just continue to go up, not just in South Africa, but even in the US. What can this group of people do to be better partners in problem solving some of those issues?
Dump some of our ideological baggage. I want to give you an example. I started to work in 1981 in the Rembrandt cigarette factory in Heidelberg. I made Rothmans King Size and Peter Stuyvesant. Wonderful cigarettes. It was when I worked there was an artisan training school on the factory premises. And we trained there 8 to 10 artisans a year. I left Rembrandt after 3 or 4 years. This was in the 1980s. I went next door to Everett, 30 kilometers away in Klipprivier. What did I find in Klipprivier? Building materials company, making building materials. There's an artisan training school on the factory premises. They train 2 or 3 millwrights a year. Now, those of you familiar with artisans and so on will know that the millwright, that's the top of the pyramid. That's sort of the PhD of artisanship. Okay, I left Heidelberg and I left Klipprivier. I came to Johannesburg. By the beginning of the 1990s, both those training centers were closed down. Why? Well, you start talking to the people and you ask them, core business. We make cigarettes. We don't train. You see the point? Building materials. We make building materials. Core business. We're not in this training business. What crap? It's now 20, 25 years later, and in the name of, and that's globalization and what you refer to as the downside, we've so focused on narrow ideologies that we just forgot that we live in a particular environment. Now the question is this, Everard's a different case, but let's stick with Rembrandt. Is any Rembrandt shareholder poorer today than what they were 30 years ago because there was an artisan training school at the factory? And the answer categorically is no. But what we say is no, government must do the artisan training. Government must provide the housing. Government must do all the healthcare. Government must do all the clinics. I always find this quite astonishing that people who believe in free markets and business and the freedom of business actually want to delegate everything else to government. Never made sense to me. I'm an old-style Afrikaner, you know. I come from the Free State. What do we know? Rembrandt is an old-style Afrikaans company. What did they know? They just made the Rupert's billionaires, but they also trained artisans more than anybody else. Dr. Rupert visited Heidelberg, where the factory was, and he said, there's no ways that his factory workers can live in the township conditions in which they lived. You're welcome to go today to Rotunda, it's a quarter of a century later, and go and look at the township that was built by Rembrandt for the factory workers. Go down to Paarl. Go and look at what was built in Paarl. How is it? It makes the RDP house look like a shack. So I think we must shed some of our ideology around what companies can do and what they can take onto the balance sheet. And if I must make one priority, that my priority would be human capital development. Whether you train artisans or whether you train typists, do you still use typists? I don't know. But whatever it is, let's just train the human capital of the country. Like, dare I say this, like Afrikaners used to do it for Afrikaners in a previous generation.
He's highlighted the issue of human capital. If we think that Africa is going to add another 1 billion people, in the next 30 years, half of which is going to be young people. That is absolutely key, and I endorse that. But I wanted to add something else, which is what Jeff highlighted right at the beginning in terms of infrastructure investment. Where in the energy sector, the gap is something like $30 billion a year. Overall is about $50 billion a year, which goes unfunded, is dragging down Africa's growth by as much as 3%, if not more, in some countries. And there is I think the challenge we face is how we attract the private sector into this public sector investment. Jeff mentioned public sector investment. How do we get those PPPs really working? The problem that I found at the AFDB, and I'm still an advisor at the moment, is that there's a problem with the supply of projects. That upstream investment in bankable projects is still a challenge. You look at the funds that have been developed, put together to support project preparation, they have actually very few and very small. In fact, I worked it out that half of those funds could all have been used just for project preparation for Inga Dam, the Grand Inga. The money will be gone. That's it. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is in creating liquid instruments to allow pension funds to invest hard savings for people. Because if you don't have those liquid instruments that allow them to get in and out, it's very difficult for pension funds to invest in long-term infrastructure. And we can create those instruments around infrastructure which is expansion-oriented, not greenfield. You've got a power station or whatever it is, you want to expand it, and you issue instruments on the back of that, financing that expansion, create pieces of paper, tradable instruments, and then pension funds can buy that. We just need a strategy for that. If it is as if investment bankers are missing when it comes to financing infrastructure in Africa, we need investment bankers in the room to do some securitization work. To me, that's one of the biggest challenges we face in terms of financing infrastructure. But also we need smart infrastructure. For example, in Lagos, I worked on a project, which is one of my best projects, debating as whether to build a road or put rail, and road was going to cost $1 billion, rail slightly less, $800 million. But we thought, hang on, actually we should build a cable car system. It was actually 10% of the cost of the rail or road. And I always think, what if we put up a cable car system on William Nicol Road in the direction of my home? Now, and that's a serious proposition, by the way. I live in Dainfen, and what if you put up a cable car system in Cairo, more in Lagos, more in Nairobi? It works. It is only 10% of the cost of a rail or road. And in South Africa, it's fantastic because you have those, the lights in the middle of the road, William Nicol. If you just reinforce that, push it up, you still keep your lights, and run a zip line, you can move people very easily. Absolutely. You don't have to worry about expanding the road. Yeah. And then that's also how you expand the how trade. You don't have to dig earth anymore. You go up. That's how we should do it. And it's cheaper.
I want your viewpoint on this as well.
Well, I think that this is great, and this is what I was saying to this industry, to the finance industry. The Sustainable Development Goals should be viewed as the breakthrough period for Africa's infrastructure. It's so profoundly needed. It's the core of what sustainable development really is. And I would count on it, actually, that there is going to be a step increase of tens of billions of dollars. We're working on it from many different points of view, from the G20, from the investment, from the multilateral development banks. China has huge excess saving that can be tapped. Japan, Korea are interested in much larger funding. The flow of projects is probably the single biggest bottleneck, the expertise of what to invest to electrify different parts of Africa or what the transport system should be. But to my mind, this is the great opportunity for finance, really to build the generation, finally, of the infrastructure for the modernization across the continent. And I think that the SDGs are an invitation to think that way. And of course, it's not going to happen by itself, but it won't happen without the leadership to say, here is a flow of projects, here's thinking big, here's really what could be done, and here's a great institution that we're being hosted by this evening, and getting together with the African Development Bank and others, and all of the NETA projects, the priority projects, but to say, this is real. Let's get them financed now. Let's systematically put this into place, I think is really the invitation.
Fantastic. Okay, folks, it's your turn. We've got a number of roving mics. Don't be shy. A question, a comment. Feel free to disagree with my panel as well.
My name is Setembi Sonchingila from KPMG. And my question, I think, is to Jeff Sachs, or rather Sachs. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
I'm just doing it because that's what people do to my name. So, yeah. Anyway, the question is, how can Africa achieve the growth that China has achieved? And I think this was part of your speech, without breaking all these international treaties that we have, which I feel like stifle the growth of Africa, in the sense that the US and China growed without these treaties, or rather they growed outside of these treaties. And when it's our turn to shine, we are told that there's international treaties, including ICC itself, that stifle our growth as the African continent. So how do we achieve those growth without breaking the laws that we have signed ourselves?
Which treaties do you have in mind?
I do not have any specific one in my head, but I mean, if you look at the fact that China at some point had to close its borders, and they did their own thing from a culture perspective. And I mean, there was when children work, what do you call it? Child labor.
Yeah.
You know, it could be that, yeah. So there was a lot of that happened in China, and all of a sudden there's a lot of money that is in there. When we try to do those things, then the ICC comes back to us to arrest our presidents, and Julius.
Prof. Sachs, can I just... I'm just going to ask you to hold that. So this is how we're going to proceed, panelists. I'm going to take a batch of questions. Don't feel compelled to respond to all of them when I come back to you. But in the interest of time, depending on the energy, we might take 2 rounds. And then I'll give you a chance to respond to whichever ones you'd like to respond to. It is a conversation, so you don't have to respond to everything.
My name is Freddie Modisaki. I'm from ACI Retirement Funds. I'm mainly concerned about education. Education in the sense that in the retirement funds in South Africa, we have to go through a lot of trustee training. And this trustee training, it actually happens when a member becomes a trustee. But my point is this: if a member, for example, had a chance of getting education at an earlier stage, for example, like we go back to schools, where you'll find that, for example, things like medical aid, they become part of the curriculum. Things like, for example, what is a retirement, what do we mean by retirement funds? Some of these things, we actually met them when I became a principal officer. That was the first time when I heard about actuaries. And I asked myself, what is an actuary? If you go really deeper down, you'll never hear, you ask any student, what is an actuary? A student, for example, maybe is doing science and maths and all that, and you say to them, look, why don't you become an actuary? They will ask you, what is that? And my point is this: I wanted to know from Jeffrey that in the US, how do they address some of these issues at an early stage, in order for the community to know that when it comes to choosing, for example, a certain careers, that how do they go along? Because with us, we embrace with this problem where you'll find that you have to, in fact, to invite trustees to become trustees because they don't know what it means to be a trustee. And they're all scared. So you go if you go to the medical aid, like I mentioned earlier on, it's the same problem. You go to the pension fund retirement, it's the same problem. You ask a person, for example, that, do you know how much you're contributing? They don't know. Now, when you go into investments, it becomes worse. Now, my point is this again, and I've been going through this for years and years and trying to bring this forward, that can this be introduced at an early stage? Now, maybe Jeffrey can give us sort of a guidance that in the USA, how do they do it?
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Prof. Sex, I'll give you a chance to respond first.
Okay. Shall we respond to all of them?
Yeah, to whichever ones tickle your fancy.
Good. Very briefly. First, on the question, could Africa grow fast with all of these constraints around? I already mentioned my basic advice, which is work together with lots of partners, with China, and South Africa is part of BRICS process, and that's good. Work with India, very important, a tremendous amount of potential there that is very strong. Japan, Korea. It's a big competitive world where you can find lots of partners, lots of investors, and the traditional links looking one way to the UK or one way to the United States. This is passé, in my view. This is what it means to be in a new world of geopolitics. And I think that that's to Africa's advantage, that it's not only Europe, or it's not only Europe and the US, but now there are very important partners and powers, China, India, others, that really should play a much bigger role. This gives a lot more freedom of maneuver, and I think it's part of the normal politics and geopolitics that is to Africa's benefit. On the question of whether there's a deterioration or not, or whether these are real gains, I think that on the whole they are real gains. I can't speak to the places you're referring to specifically, but what we see is not only the measured gains that the World Bank offers, but we see that child mortality rates have come down, suggesting that broadly access to health is improving. Not enough, but still that there has been real improvement. We know that there are 7 billion mobile phone subscribers. That's a real difference from 10 years ago. There's enough indication that there are improvements, not to dismiss it entirely, but I'm sure you're right that in pockets in South Africa, or maybe many places, there isn't improvement, or that it's so slow that it's hard to even see. But I do think that the potential is real, that it's not simply an illusion. On the question of state capitalism, I would say yes, state and capitalism, meaning that you need an active development state. Of course, if the state is active in all the wrong ways, stealing here, doing this there, it's not much of a development strategy. But if you look at China or Korea or Japan during its rapid growth phase, these were places where the state apparatus was absolutely committed to large-scale public investment. In other words, these were mission-driven societies. Korea was mission-driven because they were poor. They said, we got to get rich, and we're vulnerable to North Korean invasion. We have to get strong. And so President Park, who was a dictator who came to power in 1962, said, we must develop, and we're going to use the state apparatus to push development. It actually works. He built major private sector companies. So fortunately, they didn't go the Soviet way. They went away so that we now know what LG and Samsung and others are, because the state helped to do that. But that's a kind of state capitalism that had a lot of positive results. But it means honest, real investment. It means absolutely building the infrastructure, getting the job done. And if some part of it's stolen, at least the road's there, at least the bridges are there, at least you actually get the job done in the end. And I think it is part of this process. And on this question of training and how do you direct students, the best model in the world is not the United States, but Germany. which has the best program of school to jobs of any country that I know. And they have a big apprenticeship program where even in high school, the students that aren't going on to university are apprenticed to companies to learn real skills so that they're not just thrown out into the so-called labor market, but they're actually given a way to say, here's a job, 2 years, the company pays for part of it and the government pays for part of it, but you're learning real skills so that often you stay at that company for the entry-level job, or at least you've developed jobs. So we call that active labor market policy. And the United States Council of Economic Advisors just wrote a report that said, hey, the United States should learn from Germany because that's a good working model. And I think that there's a lot of merit to it. To think that young people will not know where to go. And second, school is not where you learn a lot of the skills that you need. You learn it in an apprenticeship. And yet to make that not just a company strategy, but a society strategy requires another partnership of government and business to put that effectively into place.
Prof. Ncube, I'm going to restrict you to 2 minutes. Respond to any question you wish, and then end with a final thought for me.
Sounds fabulous. On the comments on poverty rates, I'm finding that in Africa, the countries that have reduced poverty the fastest are those that have also targeted agriculture, which is where typically 60% of the Africans live. So Rwanda, Ethiopia, which have been sterling models and have done very well, and yet you look at Congo, DRC, Central African Republic, even Nigeria has begun to nibble at that poverty rate. So maybe also kind of sector targeting is key, and not just a centralized state-driven development. I agree with you on the issue of trustee training. I used to do a lot of that when I was an employee at Investec when I was much younger as a fund manager. It's hard when the knowledge gap is wide. It's not easy. But I know private schools in South Africa are beginning to teach business schools in primary school as early as year 7. So maybe that's the idea, that as early as that year, they should start teaching them some bit of financial literacy. Maybe that will help right across the entire schooling system, but it's not easy. In the end, it boils down to us saying, you know what, you must just know how to ask the key questions, the difficult questions, like have you beaten the benchmark this quarter? How did you perform against inflation? Literally, there are 5 questions you ask a fund manager that will make them sweat. Start from there, then we can talk about the detail.
JP, you have the final say. 2 minutes.
I just want to respond to the point about treaties. I don't think we need less treaties. I think we need more treaties. Why? Treaties enable you to trade with other people. It enables you to sell to other people. And let me give you an example. Australia and South Africa has a range of agricultural products which are absolutely identical. But Australia has a preferential treaty agreement with China. And the import charge on those Australian imports sits at 3%. The import charge is levied against South Africa on the same products, 20%. Now, who is the Chinese going to buy? Australian or South African? So what we need is, we need a treaty with China, who's our new best friend, and we'll ask our new best friend now to come to the party and give us the same treatment they give the Australians. Look what our preferential treaty agreement with Europe did for our exports. Look what AGOA, which is not a treaty, but the same kind of thing, did for our motor car exports. So I think we need more treaties because we can then trade more. And that brings me to Jeffrey's point about a vision-driven or a mission-driven society. I think it's incredibly important. Again, just an example. If we can double our exports from 0.5% of world exports, that's what South Africa exports, 0.5% of what the whole world exports. If we can take that from 0.5 to 1, we will add 40% to the South African economy. Now, that's better than a kick in the ass, all right? But the way to get there is to be vision-driven and to say every decision that we take in the public and private sector must be focused or answer just one question: what does it do for exports? That's how I understand a mission-driven society to be. And if we do the same with education and say, okay, in the next 10 years, nonsense with this, we're going to move from the bottom of international test scores to at least the middle or the top 1/3. That's a mission-driven society. Then I really think we can grow like China. I really think, I refuse to accept that China 30 years ago was better than South Africa today. Sorry, I don't accept it. If we can become vision-driven and focused, we can do what China did, absolutely.
Yeah.
They've been fabulous. Can we give them a round of applause?
Good end.